had a dilemma. I did not want to turn the TV off because I was in the midst.
Did you have the drink? Did you have the drink?
Oh, who's on?
Of watching a wedding.
What is your problem?
It was meant to take place today, but the Chatan, who hasn't seen his bride, and you'll understand why, for 3 weeks, somehow they made it happen and brought him back now from Gaza. And it was being televised on national TV. I've talked before about the beauty of the Hebrew language and the root, shoresh. And I didn't have time to put it in writing, as I often do. So, nun shin kuf, and I pointed this out before.
That's a kiss.
Never in the context in which I'm going to do now. So, nun shin kuf, the root means neshek,
Yes.
ammunition. Hold on, Florence. And from that same root is nishika. Florence, what is a nishika? You just said it. A
Kiss.
kiss.
Yeah.
Now,
Yes, yes.
I bet some of you can explain why would a kiss come from the same root as ammunition? But don't take the time to do that now. You discuss that with the person you kiss, okay? But never. What the essence of that is that you take a root and it's up to you to decide whether it's going to be for something negative or something positive, something negative or something as sweet as a kiss. But never have I seen, because he did not change into a tuxedo, but he was in his uniform and his rifle was on his shoulder. So, I've been mentioning him a lot, and there are certain things I do not agree with him, but when he says something that I like, Yossi Klein Halevi recently said that this moment in our history has shown us a quality that isn't necessarily identified with Israelis usually, certainly not men. You know, we're known as the Sabra, who's hard on the outside, sweet on the inside, and you don't always get to see that sweetness, even though it's real. But people, and men included, are crying and aren't hiding their brokenness. And there is a brokenness. Not one that's paralyzing anyone, let that be clear, but there is a brokenness. But it's also creating that unity that I've talked of. And in between the moments of joy, like the wedding I just mentioned, and the many weddings, and the return, that marvelous return of the captured Ori Megiddish soldier that was able to happen because of the IDF entry into Gaza, there are so many tears. Let me share my screen. So since I put this on my screen not so long ago, an hour, 2 hours ago, the number has increased over the last 24 hours to at least 16. And I will read their names from right to left. That we have lost, in addition to the over 300 over the last 3 weeks, soldiers. For they deserve to have their names read. Roi Dawi, 20 from Yerushalayim. Ido Avadja, 19 from Tel Aviv. Lior Siminovich, 19 from Herzliya. Ariel Reich, 21 from Yerushalayim. Adi Leon, 20 from Nili. Erez Mishlovsky, 20 from Oranit. Adi Danan, 20 from Yavne. Asif Luger, 20 from Yagur. Hallel Solomon, 20 from Dimona. Pidaya Marak, 22 from Otaniel. Roi Sergosti, 20 from Chavat Nachal Haroeh. Itai Yehuda, 20 from Rishon LeZion. Shai Arus, 20 from Cholon. Shalev Tzion Sharabi, 22. Yehi Zichrom Baruch. Now I'm just going to refer specifically to one of them. Pedaya Mark. He has quite a history. And yet, just a couple of days before he went into Gaza, he wrote this letter to his family. What's his history? His father was murdered 7 years ago in a terrorist attack, and his mother is still in rehabilitation from that attack. A few years later, his brother was killed in a car accident while he was on duty for the Ministry of Defense. And October 7th, his cousin was murdered. And as much as they tried to convince him to come for the funeral, he refused to leave the unit that he was commanding. And he wrote this letter. Ani shomer aleichem. I am watching over you. V'itchem balev. And I am with you with all my heart. Anachnu holchim limchok otam. We are going to wipe them out. Last night, they wiped him out. Yehi Zichram Baruch. I said that we get back to you. Someone in Toronto referred to your situation the other day to me, that you're facing another battlefront. And I said a few minutes ago that I'm concerned about you. Have you seen this? Did you change your name? Are you taking down your mezuzah? Thanks for the bar mitzvah invite. But will there be security? Is it safe to go to synagogue this week? Have you seen that? Or am I seeing that? Someone in the Gola posted that, and I saw it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was sent that bracha. And people have said to me that they're afraid, and I say, you've got to stand up.
So Brenda, what do you mean by stand up? But hold on 1 second. I know so many of you have been so supportive of us here. And again, that's so appreciated. And I know that so many of you have been going to these, I don't know if they're called installations. And I've heard actually that they're not necessarily in the best locations. And that doesn't make sense to me, that they're not being seen by the people who should see them. The Shabbat table or the empty beds. I'm not sure, I forget already what you've had. And I know you've gone to rallies. I know that. And I know the concert at the Meridian, is that what it's called? And your participation in that. But are you doing enough for yourselves? I'm going to tell you, I feel like I want to add something to what I listened to today. I listened to the recording of Rabbi Grover's sermon this past Shabbat. He was right on. I haven't told him yet that. I will. I see you smiling. Yeah. Make sure that you are doing everything, not just for here, but for yourselves. I meant it when I said I am concerned for you. We are fighting the battle here. We are fighting. And it seems to me that you have got to, and not be scared of doing that. We've been scared before. Stan, I see you thinking. I need you to say something.
You were talking about a quote about mezuzahs being ripped off of doorposts. Was that?
I saw it on Facebook.
We have to be careful because UJA put that out a while ago and then retracted it by saying that this has gone out on social media, and it's a way of, in a reverse way, of instilling fear into our Jewish community, that by people putting that out, where in actuality it has not been the case. I'm in an apartment building here where 90% of the doors on this floor have mezuzahs and not one has come off. Last week in Shul at Beth Tikvah, we had a very good crowd of people. People are coming. And this is a very, very important. I just also wanted something's going through my head about when I was a very young boy, my grandfather, who came from Poland originally in the 1920s to Toronto, used to go around muttering in Yiddish, "Es ist schwer zu sein a Yid."
Yeah.
which everybody understands what that, it's tough to be a Jew. We have an army now, we have a state. It's tough, but it's better than it was when it was my grandfather's time. And he was talking about what he left in Poland. He left pogroms. And it's still cisfer to sein a Yid. And it's a worry, but I'm proud of the fact that we have an army and our own state. That's what's on my mind, Bracha.
Well, as long as you're saying that, have you heard or did you see the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations yesterday? Did you see what he did there?
No.
No.
Because it's been debated here, and for the most part, not appreciated here. He was speaking in the United Nations, and then he said, until this is settled, my staff and I, and they proceeded to do this, they put on their jackets a yellow star saying never again. Now, he had good intentions, but you can imagine why it was not received overwhelmingly over here.
Yeah.
Because of what you just said, Stan. We're not in that position.
That's right.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah,
Bracha.
Bracha.
Brenda.
To get back to, first of all, that what the passage that you read was not that other people were taking down mezuzahs, but I do know people that are afraid to wear a kippah, for example, in public, because people have been harassed. And by standing up, I'm saying, I think that the hate wins if you don't show pride in who you are. So I think it's I read the whole thing, and it was quite a long list of things
I left out
you
a
were
few.
quoting from.
Yeah.
And I think the point of it was that we can't back down, that we have to show pride. And I think that was also part of what Rabbi Grover was saying, that we have to teach our children to have pride and stand up and not always be negative and going on about the Holocaust, but having pride in who we are and what we do, and to show our strength that way.
Bracha.
Yeah.
Bracha.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to show our pride and to show who we are and to know who we are. But my late husband and I were traveling in London a number of years ago, and we met up with friends of mine who said, do not wear a kippah in public. You are likely to be physically attacked. And that was maybe 10 years ago in the city of London. You have to, you want to be proud, you want to teach children to be proud, you want to show who you are, but you have to be safe. So out came the baseball cap, as if that would help, but it helped.
Yeah, but I think the question is whether you want to live in that kind of environment long term.
Of course not. However, given our times and what's going on in all the major cities and in the universities of the Western world right now, you have to be a little practical because they are physical. Look what happened at Cornell to the Jewish students.
Awful.
So yeah, it's a tough call. It's a tough call. There's no easy answer to this.
Bracha,
Yeah.
I'd like to go back to what you said at the beginning of the root word with neshek and neshika.
Yes, Marlene.
Because I think that even though we are in a difficult situation, there is something that we can say is happening positively. And I see that amongst my grandsons who are in their early 20s. and a lot of their friends who really, up until this point, Israel was there. They had visited Israel, but it was not a part of their neshama, the way it is in our generation. And all of a sudden, they have woken up to the reality that, number one, Israel is more important than they thought it was. And number two, that they have to take that pride and stand up for their beliefs as Jews and move forward with it, and not be afraid to voice their opinions. And I've had this discussion with their mom, and who works in mainly a company that's got a lot of Jewish people in it. But, you know, she said to me, people are coming to me with things that, you know, they don't feel are being fairly written. Like, and she said, you have to go to HR. You have to be out there. You have to be able to say, this is not who we are, and this is not portraying the situation in a positive manner. And all of us have to do that. The second thing is, I have heard more people say, I have to be with my people. And they're coming to shul, and they're going to programs, and they're going to rallies because there's a feeling that we have to be yachad, together. And I think that, and they're coming from all segments of the community that, you know, like in Israel, is constantly fighting with each other over a lot of trivial junk. A lot of it is. And the third thing is, last Sunday, a group of us had the privilege of going to the Koffler Gallery to see the synagogue that has been built at Babin Yar. And I kept thinking, and I had personally been to Babi Yar, because that's what it was called at that time. And this beautiful, beautiful architectural synagogue has been built on the spot where something so horrendous happened to the Jews. And so they have taken something, neshek, ammunition, and they have used that in a very sweet and wonderful way to build a structure that portrays the beauty of Judaism visually, and it's actually, even through all of the war that's going on in the Ukraine, is being protected by the Ukrainian people because they too are taking pride in it. So these are the kinds of things that really give me hope to move forward in a positive direction. And I hope other people would gain hope from the same things.
Thank you, Marlene. Well, I'm glad to hear that. There's something that, I don't know whether they're called jewelers or whatever. It's called roses, I think, from rockets, that they also take these rockets and make beautiful objects from them. Yeah. But that's wonderful to hear about your grandsons. You have grandsons that are in their 20s? Hello? Marlene? Where'd she go?
He's muted.
I
Why?
didn't press my space bar. I do. I have one who's 20 and one who's almost 20 and one who's 22.
Oh, you think I'm going to say I would think they're in their 40s. No, I was going to say quite the opposite. Okay, no.
Well, I have one who's
I
8.
figure. Okay. Anyone else want to say before we move on? There are a lot of things that one can feel and say, and this is your time. Rita.
Baruch, my concern is the fact that just as what's happening in Ukraine, the world gets tired of hearing the story. They started out by saying Israel has a right to defend itself and protect itself. And now we're hearing, well, I think Israel is getting a little too aggressive. They're going overboard. The fact that Jews were killed, innocent Jews, and no one wants to see innocent Palestinians killed either, whether they be women, children, or older folks, whatever. But it's the way in which Hamas organizes itself, using human beings as a shield. You know,
Absolutely, David.
Pardon?
Yeah, no, I'm agreeing with you, and that's being discussed here.
Yeah, and then you get the whole thing with Israel is preventing water from getting into Israel. I heard recently that only about 6% of the water that Gaza uses comes actually in from Israel. Most of the water that Gaza uses is desalinated in Gaza. Now, whether that's accurate or not, I don't know.
No,
It's not accurate.
no,
Okay.
we've said this last week. Give me a moment.
Yeah.
Two things. Israel is discussing whether it should show the world pictures, images that are more horrifying than the images that they have shown. Because maybe then it will sink in. More horrifying, and I think you've seen horrifying images. Because they're saying exactly what you saw, David. And I'm not seeing you, David, so be impressed that I remember your voice, okay? Now, because we're aware, we knew that once Israel began doing what it has to do, that's how people would react, including Jewish Wolf Blitzer, who's always been like that.
We become the aggressor.
Yeah. But Israel, I forget the number, but thousands and thousands have listened to Israel, who has told them to go south. And I think it's only 200,000 that are still there, and Hamas will not let them go. And they're there because they still need them as human shields under the hospital. Have you seen the picture of the hospital and the tunnels that are underneath that hospital? Have you seen those?
No, I have not seen them either on Canadian or CNN.
Yeah.
No, I've seen them.
Israel has been given permission? I don't know. So it's taking a little longer, but they are sending trucks of food and water, but they are permitted to check them before they let them go into Gaza to be sure that it's not ammunition, because they are still firing rockets daily, not just in Gaza, but into Tel Aviv,
Ashkelon. I just
into
got
Ashkelon,
I
into
just got a note
Rehoboth,
5
where Linda
minutes
Siegel's
ago.
daughter lives, to where Tel Aviv, where Batya will go back tomorrow morning to teach.
That's right.
Not just to down south. Do you remember Gloria and Howie Winter?
Yes.
Yes.
So they had to move out of where they are to, I forget now where they're staying. Meredith Rosen just told me. So you move out of those places, but then you come to other places where they're also getting rockets. And I'm looking at Ike Birnbaum. Sheila has family in Tel Aviv, right? So it's all over. And I was in the shelter yesterday in Seaport the other day. I forget why I went into that. Doesn't matter.
There was a siren. There was a siren. We
No,
went
no,
to,
no, I didn't mean why I went into the shelter, why I just started saying this.
oh, well, because we're making a point. 5 minutes ago, I got a notice about rockets going into the southern part of Ashkelon. I get notices.
Anybody else? David, I'm sorry, did you have something else?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bracha,
Stan.
you mentioned Wolf Blitzer.
Yeah,
And there are, and I'm saying this for people who have grandchildren who are on Facebook or wherever, on Instagram. There are Jews in this city, unfortunately, a lot younger than Wolf Blitzer, decades younger, who are not with us. Let's put it politely. And it's very disturbing.
yeah.
So, Bracha, there are a lot of people who are doing things in the city. I was part of a group on Sunday who had a vigil at 11 o'clock in the morning. We didn't know.
Shirley Ann,
Yeah.
you came on a little late. I referred to all of that. I don't
Okay,
want you
sorry.
to think
Okay,
that I
good.
did not acknowledge all of that,
Okay, good.
okay? Okay. So, last week, we referred to Moses' first revolution in him trying to suggest that ritual in the way that it was being done in the ancient world should change. Sacrifices was not what God was looking for, but Torah study, to say it very succinctly. Today, we're talking about a second revolution. And to say it succinctly, he is looking for something else that is also not the norm in the ancient world. Monarchy without power. And having grown up in Egypt, he knows what monarchy is with power. So, we also said last week that Moshe, in Sefer Dvarim, the last book of the Torah, Deuteronomy, is narrating the plot of the first 4 books from his own personal perspective. And in doing so, he downplays his role, blurring the differences between himself and the nation. Why? Asks Micah. It's as if instead of putting himself here and the people here, he's putting himself side by side with the people. And in fact, don't we call Moshe the most modest of prophets? And Micah says the following, Micah Goodman. Very often, the rewriting of the past, because we said he feels anything that Moshe said in his last words in Dvarim really apply today. Very often, the rewriting of the past is not about the past, but about the future. Perhaps Moshe wants to diminish the role of future leaders. Now, this is a pasuk from Deuteronomy. Let it, the Torah, remain with the king and let him read it all his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God, to observe faithfully every word of this Torah, as well as these laws. Thus, he will not act haughtily toward his fellows or deviate from the commandment to the right or to the left, to the end that he and his descendants may reign long in the midst of Israel. So what does Moshe want, unlike what was going on in Egypt and the rest of the ancient world? He wants a non-hierarchical society. We need somebody to be the coordinator. Yes, and to inspire. But he doesn't want somebody to feel, a human being to feel that he is the ruler, all powerful. That is a revolution because it's in contrast to the norm. And this is what Micah describes as the norm and what he wants. Now, as I'm reading this, I want you to think. Can you picture kings, leaders that are like this or not like this? And why? Or why not? In the ancient world, the king was never depicted as obedient. Did they sit and read a book telling them what to do? But rather as someone who commands the obedience of others. But Deuteronomy offers a radically different view of kingship, because the nation is never commanded to obey the king. First of all, God didn't want them to have a king. But if they're going to ask for one, he's going to let them. They want to be like others. Okay. The people are commanded to obey the authority of the courts and to obey any true prophets who arise, but they are never told to obey the king. Though we would expect to find such a verse, it does not appear. Political history is rife with examples of kings who ruled by divine right, according to those nations. In all such cases, the authority of the ruler rested on a religious foundation, and the people were religiously obligated to obey him. In European society, God played a significant political role. In the Middle Ages, as in the ancient world, it was commonly accepted that it was God who invested kings with the divine right to rule over their subjects. The notion of divine right secured the king's authority so long as God conferred on the king the authority to rule. Obeying the king was a way of obeying God. The religious feelings that would lead a person to submit to God would also cultivate submission to the king. This is one of the most ancient forms of manipulation and one of the most effective. But the Torah does not do this. In the Torah, the people are not commanded to obey the king. They are not told that obeying the king is a way of obeying God. Instead, the Bible's kings, like their subjects, are commanded to submit to the Torah. And so the Bible's king does not just rule, he is ruled. So Moshe wants a people that can learn and teach words of Torah on its own without solely depending on a manhig. should have a leader, but you should be able, each person in the community, be able to teach. People here now are so in awe of how the entire population has come forward, not just the soldiers, but citizens in volunteering in every field. I meant figuratively, but literally also, because you can't let the products just sit there. If the people who normally work there have gone off to reserve duty. And so you see daily phone numbers saying, please call if you're available to come and pick avocados, tomatoes. And it's telling us which tomatoes to buy, what they look like, as opposed to buying from Turkey. And you see people saying, Turkey, have you forgotten that not so long ago we were the first to come there when you had an earthquake? But let me not get off track. Okay, so now let's see what these laws of monarchy are about. But just asking you, what did you think about that? Can you think of any leader, king or otherwise?
I'm thinking of the Pope in the Catholic Church, you know,
Yes.
the Pope in the Catholic Church as well, you know, and quite often the Pope went to, was in rivalry with the kings of Europe.
Okay, Bev, so do you want to go follow the Pope?
You know, and again, you know, when Hitler rose to power, the whole idea was obedience. That's what he was teaching his soldiers, that nobody, you know, turn away from him. And again, there was that film, The Triumph of Evil or something, where he sort of set himself up as a god.
Yeah, okay. But I have to say very quickly that that's a different kind of obedience, that God isn't looking for anybody, any of us, to obey him in the way that a Hitler wanted his Gestapo to obey him, or people to obey him. Right?
The ancient kings had that kind of control
Kings
over
did.
everybody.
Yes, absolutely,
You know,
absolutely.
slavery
Okay.
and
Yeah, okay, yeah, okay. Now, so look how Moshe was looking to limit the power of a future king. So he says in Dvarim, and look to be able to answer these two questions. Please mute yourself, somebody who's talking out of this. On what condition may a king be appointed? And secondly, when may that happen? When you come to the land, Moshe says, the Lord, remember this farewell speech is being said to the Israelites, obviously before they enter Canaan, because Moshe doesn't go with them. And he cares so much about them that he's not going to let them leave him before he tries to prepare them to enter the land. So he says to them, when you come to the land the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and live therein, and you say, I will set a king over myself like all the nations around me. So, on what condition may a king be appointed? What has to be? for them to have a king? Well, I'll give you
People
that.
have to want it.
They have to want it. They have to request it. And what 3 things have to happen for them to be able to have the king? 3 things there. Very specific 3 things.
The nations around you have kings.
No. What are 3 things that the Israelites have to do before they can appoint?
They have to come to the land of Israel.
Enter
and they
it.
have to actually possess it and
Yes.
live in it.
And live in it. In other words, the war is finished. Okay. Now, the next thing. Moshe is afraid of what? You shall set a king over you, one whom the Lord your God chooses. From among your brothers, you shall set a king over yourself. You shall not appoint a foreigner over yourself, one who is not your brother. So what is Moshe afraid of? They're going to want a king, to say it succinctly, because they're going to see that their neighbors have kings and they want to be like. He knows that's what's going to happen. It was actually easier to keep them unified and Jewish when they were in the desert because they were by themselves. But once they're in their own land and they're surrounded by neighbors, that's when they're going to want to be like everybody else. So what is he concerned about? That maybe they'll take somebody else from another nation to be their king. So he says, no, it's got to be one of your own. Okay.
Well,
Then,
there's one question,
yeah,
bro.
go on, Michael.
Like a little discrepancy here. On the one hand, you shall set a king over yourself, and you will not appoint a foreigner, somebody who's your brother. But then he says, you will set a king over you whom God chooses.
Well, it's like there's a negotiation. They're going to suggest somebody through a prophet. The first time this is going to happen is going to be with Samuel. And it's going to be approved. It's going to be approved. Okay, good. Good question. Okay, now, what are other limitations that are going to happen? These verses, and think of why these limitations are put on the king. Only the king may not acquire many horses for himself, so that he will not bring the people back to Egypt in order to acquire many horses. For the Lord said to you, you shall not return that way anymore. And he shall not take many wives for himself, and his heart must not turn away, and he shall not acquire much silver and gold. Okay, so why doesn't Moshe want the king to have many horses or many wives or much silver and gold? What do horses represent?
It's all wealth.
Well, all of these represent power, but also power. Without horses, it also means, horses represent chariots, usable chariots, which are primary weapons of war. The wives also, in those days, the wives would represent alliances with other nations, and the silver and gold would drain the people of their resources. So, in one word, he wants the king to have restraint. And we know that leaders do not necessarily have restraint. And
Bracha.
just
Bracha, that only worked up until Solomon.
well, you're getting ahead of the game, Marlene. Okay, this is a vision that Moshe has. Is it realistic? Not necessarily. Okay, but this is the vision that Moshe had. Okay? Yes. Okay. Marlene. Okay. Now, this is also interesting. You would think that when the army of a country goes out to war, that it would be the king who would give them that speech of encouragement. But Moshe says the following: when you go out to war against your enemies and you see horse and chariot of people more numerous than you, you shall not be afraid of them, for the Lord your God is with you, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And it will be when you approach the battle that the Kohen shall come near and speak to the people. So it's the priest. And he shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, today, you are approaching the battle against your enemies. Let your hearts not be faint. You shall not be afraid, and you shall not be alarmed, and you shall not be terrified because of them. For the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to save you. So what do these verses imply? Why the Kohen giving the words of encouragement as opposed to the king? What message was Moshe trying to transmit?
The priest is still the one who has the religious power and the power to give the benediction to the people. And it's not up to the, and the king is still under the authority of the priest.
Yes,
I
but
think
go on.
I think that too, what it's saying is that the ultimate power is in the hands of God. It's not, and the Kohen is the intermediary relaying this message to the people. It's not like General Custer going and say, follow me. It's God who's saying, this is the battle that you're going to fight.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking that every day, twice a day, the IDF, Tsahal's spokesman, addresses the country. And there was discussion about him today, how much trust he evokes from us. He speaks in a way that people really believe in him. And that's very, very important. But I think what Moshe is saying here, that the real trust, what do they say? That there are no atheists in a, what's the word? In a fox?
A bunker?
Yeah. I've said it, I think 2 weeks ago. What gives these young boys and girls, by the way, their courage is beyond me. Because anyone going into Gaza knows real possibility, Okay, so again, Moshe is suggesting that even a king, any leader, what's going to make him a true leader is if his power is limited. Now, he repeats again that a true leader can only serve his community if he's aware that he still has what to learn. And you might be aware of this law, again in Deuteronomy. and it will be when he sits upon his royal throne that he shall write for himself 2 copies of this Torah on a scroll from that Torah which is before the Levitic Kohanim, priests. So 2 things here. What is the significance of the king writing the Torah and writing it before the Levitical priests? So, anybody want to take a guess? Why is it important? First of all, why 2 Torahs? And why that he write it? And why before the priest? Anyone?
I'm thinking he has to have the knowledge of how to write and what the writing means. And quite often, if you write it yourself, you're reading it as you write it and thinking it to reinforce what he's writing and what he has to believe in.
Nice.
And again, before the Levitic Kohanim, it has to be accurate. So they have to check what he's writing and make sure that it's accurate.
Okay, good, Bev. Anybody else? I think it's also, he has 2, one that he leaves by his bed and one that he takes with him all the time. Okay, and Micah writes, the king thus will remember that he does not rule, but is ruled over, and that he is not above the nation, but a part of it. If he bears this in mind, he will remain the true king of the people. This is the paradox of kingship. If the king thinks that he is an absolute ruler, he and his successors will lose their power. The book of Deuteronomy asserts that only someone who is prepared to accept his limited rule will remain ruler of the people. Listen to that again.
No one is above the law.
No, no one is. The book of Deuteronomy asserts that only someone who is prepared to accept his limited rule will remain ruler of the people. Now, Marlene asked before. I don't remember exactly how you phrased it, but is this image of a weakened king realistic? You know, I've said this before. There are people, individuals, that I'm sure each of us in our different communities would think of, gee, wouldn't it be great if she or he would take on being president or prime minister? But we could all suggest why she or he would not even consider it. Because they would be afraid. And I've heard a couple of people say the fear of becoming corrupt. Because once you're in that position, it is almost impossible to not. If you want to get this passed, then you're going to play that game. It's almost impossible. And that's really, really sad, because that leaves us in a very sad state on both sides of the ocean. Now, Micah reminds us that the first time that a king really comes into the picture in our history is in the time of Samuel. And the Israelites asked Samuel, saying, "You're getting old, we need a king. And now behold, the king whom you have chosen, whom you have requested, and behold, the Lord has appointed a king over you. If you will fear the Lord and serve him and hearken to his voice, and you will not rebel against the commandments of the Lord, both you and the king who reigns over you will be after the Lord your God. But if you will not hearken to the voice of the Lord, and you rebel against the commandments of the Lord's hand will be against you and against your fathers." Now, Samuel is the go-between here between God and the Israelites. Both the king, Saul, and the people are charged to obey God. But Saul, twice makes his own judgment, negating God's will. Now we know that God likes it when a good man argues with him. Who did we read about this week? Avram. Do we see God get mad at him? When Avram says, "God, you of all people are going to kill even the innocent?" No, God accepts Avram's arguing with him. But when God says something that should be followed without questioning, then follow it. On the eve of the war with the Plishtim, the Philistines, Saul doesn't follow God. And during Israel's war with Amalek, he doesn't listen to God. And as a result, Saul loses his kingship. And what was Saul's mistake? He let the evil king of Amalek live. Just as an aside. Now, what's interesting is Micah claims that this still doesn't prove that this model is unrealistic. Saul failed to listen to Samuel the prophet. Moses is seeking a king who will read the Torah. And if he reads the Torah, rather than have to listen to a go-between, he'll be exposed more directly to God's word. Now, what does that mean? The Torah is open to different interpretations. So we don't have to have people dictating. I'm thinking I could go off on that for another hour, but I can't. So if last week Micah Goodman suggested that the key to religion these days is to study, really study that Torah, if a king or a prime minister or a president were to really study the Torah, he would understand, she would understand that there is no place for the arrogance of a monarch who doesn't know how to treat people equally on his or her level. And that, in fact, the role of a king or a queen is to be a shaliach tzibur. Serving your community. You happen to be the one who is acting for the community, but you're a member of that community. And Micah Goodman is suggesting that Moshe, who is considered, I say this again, the most humble of leaders, realized that. And that's why in this last farewell speech was so concerned about his people's future, even though he could have been so angry that he wasn't being allowed to enter this land. At least 4 of the mothers or fathers of these fallen boys, children, were already talking on TV today. How is that possible? They just died in the last 24 hours. Died. Fell. Like Moshe, who wanted the Israelites to succeed in entering the land, these boys were willing to give their lives to make sure we stay here.